Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. We appreciate you taking the time. We are so excited. I am so excited that you are here. We'll take maybe 45 seconds and give those who may be transitioning from another meeting the opportunity to arrive. And as you are coming in, I would love for you to drop in the chat. Um, your first name and where you are joining us from. Where you're joining us from. You can give the state, you can give us the time zone you're in, you can give us the vacation island you're currently sitting at. So just drop that in the chat for us. Oh, hi, Nicole from Texas. Welcome. Baron is here with us. Thank you. Who else do we have joining today? Liz, hi from California. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's take another 15 seconds. Celeste from Virginia. Hello. So excited that everyone is here. I know that the content that we have for you all today is going to be very helpful, whether you're an ed tech team, an ed tech innovator, a solution provider. I believe that you're going to walk away from with something today that is going to be able to help you. So we'll go ahead and dive in. We certainly do not want to belabor the time. Really quickly, I know that this is a webinar style, so I want to draw your attention over to our Q&A. There is an opportunity to drop questions in the chat as we go through our session today. So I want to make sure that you all know to do that because we will take some time at the end to dive into your questions. We want to make sure that we address anything that we can in the time that we have. So please feel free to use that. And welcome, 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 everyone. So glad you are here. I am Sharina Bates, Project Director at the Collaborative Innovation Studio at Digital Promise, and I'm going to be your facilitator today. And we are going to jump right in. We have a packed 45 minutes, and I want to make sure, like I said, that you leave with something that you can take back to your team. Another quick reminder outside of the Q&A is that I want to be sure you grab a pen or a pencil and some paper because you got some in-session homework. Some people might call it a pop quiz. We all love those, right? So make sure you have something that you can write with. We'll get to that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and jump in. This is our Collaborative by Design, our webinar number one, co-designing ed tech that fits district needs. You are in the right place at the right time for this opportunity. And I want to maybe introduce this idea. If you've ever done a demo that maybe went beautifully and then you watch the tool sit unused in the district that you were interacting with, this session is for you, for ed tech funders, for product managers, for industry innovators. Today's session is rooted in that spirit where we're not just going to talk about co-design. Today, we're not just going to talk about a product. We are going to talk about that gap between the product and the reality in the classroom and who the tool is meant to serve. Most importantly, though, we're going to give you a tool that will help you close the gap today. So here is our agenda. First thing we're going to do, you already received your welcome. You already received the framing, and we're going to jump into why great tools don't stick. And then we're going to look at co-designing with collaborative innovation, an amazing framework that I believe you all will find utility in. And then there's that pop quiz, that homework. We're going to get into a 5 whys activity. I'm going to talk briefly about an upcoming opportunity with our Summer School 2026, and then that Q&A that I mentioned to you all and the closing. So let's get started. We're kicking things off first with who we are at Digital Promise. Quick context before we dive in. We are a global nonprofit working to expand opportunity for every learner. And so we work at the intersection of research, practice, and technology with a particular focus and emphasis on communities that have historically been excluded. And so, what's different about our approach is that we don't do this work to communities, we do it with them. We co design, we co create, and we co invest in innovations that truly reflect the lived realities of those we really aim to support. And Collaborative Innovation Studio. This is Digital Promises initiative, really focused and team really focused on specifically co-design and co-research between ed tech developers and the districts and students that they serve. And so that's work that we're here to talk about today. Later on, I'll drop the link where you can learn more about the work that we do on our website. So, next, I want to introduce you to our team really quickly. Everybody who you see on the screen has had a part in the studio in its development and it just coming alive. And so, as your facilitator today, I just wanted to acknowledge these amazing people who have helped contribute significantly to this work. For our journey, here's what we're going to do. We are going to explore why the gap between a great demo and sustained district adoption is a fit problem, not a product quality problem. We are going to understand what co-design actually means and how it differs from feedback and user testing and why it changes what gets built. And then the third thing we'll do is discover the root cause behind maybe your own product's adoption barriers and connect it to a co-design strategy that I promise you can act on today. And that's that activity I mentioned earlier. All right, you all, without further ado, let's introduce the problem. Why great tools don't stick. Now, I want you to think about a product adoption challenge that maybe you or your team has faced. I want you to consider something real, something recent, even. Maybe where you struggle to get traction in a district. Think about what the root of it was. On the screen, you have some options. And if you can drop in chat what you believe the root of that barrier was, that number one barrier, I'd love to see what type of feedback you all have. So, A, if this is you, I want you to drop letter A. Districts don't have capacity to implement. Letter B, the tool doesn't map to how teachers actually work. Letter C, decision makers say yes, but end users don't engage. And then D, if there's something different, feel free to drop what that is. So if you are dealing or have dealt with a barrier, which of these options best describes your challenge? Let's take about 30 seconds to drop in chat. Which of these options may describe your challenge? And if it's something different, please feel free to share that as well. And let me pull up the chat. Nothing yet. Okay. And maybe you don't have anything that's coming to mind. Oh, there it goes. We have someone who's saying that it's the decision makers giving us a green light, but maybe the end users don't engage. The tool isn't mapping to how the teachers actually work. That comes up regularly. And then that capacity is a big, big piece. These are all great responses. Thank you so much. I want you all to hold on to that because we are going to use it a little bit later. So let's look at this idea between what the promising demo looks like, sustained adoption, and that connective tissue. When you have built a great educational tool, and you don't see the movement in a district or with a partner, you don't see the traction, let's see why that could be. You have a promising demo. So this means the pitch is great. It goes well. The stakeholders are excited. The district leaders are excited. The teachers are excited. And then you have this end point of this sustained adoption. This is where the tool is embedded in practice, is implemented, maybe the district renews and expands, but there's something that happens in the middle that really doesn't allow us to get to that end, and we call that the gap. And the gap is really this idea around fit, how well the tool maps to real district needs, the operations, the teacher workflow, and even the learner needs. All of this is the reality of what may happen with a product or a tool and getting to the end of that sustained adoption. And so, the framework that we're going to introduce, or that I'll share with you all in just a moment around collaborative innovation, is really going to show you how it's not about the product being a problem. It really is about that fit, right? It's about whether your product works in the district for the educators and for the students. So not quality of the product, because we might think that's abstract, but it really is about that fit. And that is the problem that we're here to solve today. Let's take a look at defining co-design. What is co-design? And we hear it often because so many people really do the work around co-design. But here at Digital Promise and with collaborative innovation, co-design is defined as a process where we take different stakeholders, we bring them together to find a solution to a shared problem through collaborative research and development. And so there are a few words that I want to pull out of that definition. The first is different stakeholders, right? It's not just an internal team, it's not just the most engaged users, but it really is the people who may be hard to reach, but are closest to the challenge. They're most impacted by the outcome. And then the second thing that I want to bring to your attention is around shared problem. So outside and beyond your product roadmap, there is a problem that the district owns as well. And so, with collaborative research and development, we're able to bring together all of the stakeholders to address that shared problem. Now, here is where it gets really real, is earning the district trust with those co-design priorities. In co-design, we have three priorities that we focus on. The first is prioritizing relationships. This is important because without those relationships, without the trust building, without the transparency, we're really limited in the way that we can engage with the stakeholders. And so co-designers must share a meaningful relationship that is based on trust and respect. The second priority that we talk about with co-design is capacity building. These co-design champions really elevate this belief that everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn. And then our third priority is around shared contribution and benefits. So this is about sharing those contributions and ensuring that everyone's ideas, their perspectives, they're considered throughout the entire process, from the very beginning right up until the end. So I want you to keep this in mind when we talk about a little bit later collaborative innovation, and maybe some opportunities that you can take away today to really integrate the prioritization of relationships, capacity building, and then that shared contribution and benefit. Okay, so what does this even mean? When we put it in practice, here is what it means. Those three priorities I shared really translates to districts leading the way by surfacing those real challenges and their priorities. It also looks like providers and EdTech partners adapting their tools and their services and doing this in direct response to the district needs. And then lastly, the students, the families, and the educators really contributing their perspectives. And so that is the best picture of co-design, right? It's not a demo, it's not an isolated survey, but it really is doing the work in sync with the district, the practitioners, and the students. So I want to share with you all now what I'm really excited about: collaborative innovation. This is the philosophy that we bring to this work, the model that guides how we co-design with, not for. On the screen, we have our core tenets, 6 tenets that really grounds our work, 4 practice tenets and 2 impact tenets. Now, I won't read all of this because at the end of our time together, you'll get an email that will include a link that'll go directly to the tenets. But I want to share really quickly, just high level, collective ownership, where work is co-led in research, student voice, where the students are collaborators, context expertise, and proximity. So, understanding the history and the identities of those with the lived experiences, continuity of commitment. It is really the research and the design practices being deeply embedded in the real conditions. And then we have reimagining progress and building capacity. So, ensuring that the work is sustainable but beyond any one point. We'll come back to these tenets and our activities, but I wanted to share them with you because this really is what anchors collaborative innovation and co-design. I want to remind you all that we have our chat open, so feel free to drop questions as they come up. We will get to them at the end. So when you think about from a product team perspective, maybe even from a district leadership perspective, there are a lot of ideas that surround district adoption. But there are 3 myths that I want to debunk today, right now. The first one is that one great product works for everyone. The reality is that it is a myth. Districts really differ. The contextualized needs that they have are so vastly different from rural to urban. And so we understand that generic solutions solve generic problems. The second myth that I want to debunk is that end of development testing is enough. What we do at the end is just enough. But the truth is that the design decisions that matter most, they happen early, right? Because it is the feedback, it is the input, it is the lived experiences from our community that we're designing for that helps to inform how we're thinking about the tool, how we're thinking about the configurations and the features. And then the last myth is that we already collect user feedback. We already do it. And while surveys are great and advisory boards are needed, co-design means that community voices shape decisions. They don't just inform them. So now that we have those myths out of the way, let's look side by side what common co-design practices are and compare them to collaborative co-design. Here on the left side of the screen, here are some common design practices. Some people may even use the word traditional design practices. Traditional top-down development, developer-driven decision-making, limited user testing at the end, unequal power dynamics, and even a survey may be sent to teachers at year end. And while those are common design practices, when you compare them to co-design practices, you begin to see the differences emerge. With co-design, it's a collaborative process with districts for shared problem solving. We talked about that shared problem solving earlier. It's an equal partnership between educators, students, and the developers. It's built on trust and respect. That relational aspect is so important. And then that power sharing that happens across all of the stages is going to be critical as well. Mutual teaching and learning. And lastly, and I believe one of the most important is that it is an iterative process and not just a one-time event. So let's look now at some mindsets. I want to share with you 3 mindset shifts that any team can make today to begin to introduce co-design in a different way. You can go from we build, then test. That is maybe a mindset that exists on your team or maybe someone that you are currently partnering with. And while that's okay, when we talk about co-design, we shift from we build, then test to we build with educators and communities. The second mindset shift that I'd like to introduce is that districts are customers. Maybe you've heard this term, not maybe, I know that we've all heard it, the vendor. But when we talk about co-design, Districts are co-creators and design partners. And so it moves from a vendor relationship and less of a transactional experience to more of a collaborative experience. And then the last mindset shift that I want to introduce is that feedback is input. And feedback, let me say this is quite necessary. In fact, we have a separate webinar where we are heavily focusing on feedback, closing that loop. But the mindset shift here in the context of co-design is that feedback drives product decisions. So think about these for a moment because we are going to shift into our activity. And while all of these sound simple, they're not. And I recognize that. But the first step is naming the opportunity to shift the mindset. And so that's what we've done here. I want to pause just for a second to see if there are any questions. Okay, we're good. And then I want to check my time. We're great. All right. So I mentioned that pop quiz earlier. Guess what? We have arrived. The time is now. We are going to do a live activity. And this is the five whys root cause analysis. Now, many of you have probably very likely done a five whys, or maybe you've done something similar like a fishbone activity. But this is the part where you get to do the work. I don't have time today to dive deeply into the entire framework of the five whys root cause analysis, but I can tell you this, that it works. Okay. So I'll walk you through the protocol before you have the opportunity to do it yourself. But let me first share what the root cause analysis method is. The first thing you do is start with the challenge. So think about a specific behavior, maybe that you've observed, not a vague outcome, but you want to be as specific as possible. And then you ask why 5 times with each answer becoming the next question. And really, the goal is to get below the symptoms, right? Sometimes we've seen where organizations, teams, in any capacity, in any industry, they are constantly solving for the solution, but not getting to their root cause. And so that's what this activity and this method is going to do for us. It'll allow us to get up under the hood to see what's really going on. So the goal is to do that. We want to think of something structural. Now, remember that poll that you did earlier where we asked that barrier, what is the one thing maybe that you are seeing? I want you to bring that back up in your mind because we are going to use the response that you had to orient us around this activity. So on the screen is an example that I would love to walk you all through. We remember now with root cause, you always want to start with a problem statement or a challenge statement. And so today, here is our challenge statement. Teachers stop using our platform after the first month. That's a real challenge, if you ask me. But now I have to ask, why? Why did they stop using the platform after the first month? Well, they reverted to their old spreadsheet and the paper system for tracking progress. Well, why did they do that? Because logging student data into the platform takes longer than their old method and it disrupts their existing routine. Okay, well, why? The data entry workflow was designed around how the engineering team modeled the data, not around how teachers actually move through the class period. Well, why is that? Because teachers weren't involved in designing the data entry workflow, only in testing the finished product. And so now that we've asked our five whys in this example, let's get to the last one. Why? Which we will land at our root cause. The development process treated teacher input as a final validation step rather than a starting point for the design. And I hope you can see from this example, because we were specific in the challenge statement that we named, that we were able to arrive at this ultimate root cause. And I also want to name that you may have multiple root causes, right? And so you can do this as many times as needed to see how many root causes emerge and then prioritize those based off of whatever your challenge is. So here is the example that I shared with you. But now we want to take it a step further. You remember those tenets that I talked about earlier? Well, they're back. We want to compare the practice tenets and the impact tenets and map them to the root cause. In this particular example on screen, the challenge statement: teachers stop using our platform after the first month. Our root cause that we identify from this round of the activity is that the development process didn't engage the teachers until the very end. Now, I want to ask you all first, before I give a response, which of these tenets do you believe maps to the root cause? When you really think about it, take a look. I'll give you just a couple more than a couple seconds. Let's take 30 seconds. Take a look at these tenets and then that root cause. And anyone, drop in the chat, which tenet do you believe maps back to the root cause? Give you about 15 seconds. In this example, I would say that the tenet that maps back to the root cause is context, expertise, and proximity. And I say that because it emphasizes the history, the identity, and the perspectives of those with the lived experiences relevant to the challenge. And in this case, that would be the teachers. And so context expertise maps back because the teachers weren't their input, their expertise was not used to shape the tool that they were asked to engage with. And so that is the example that I wanted to share with you all before I give you time to do your own 5 whys activity. So now it's your turn. You can apply the 5 whys activity to a challenge that maybe you faced previously or one that you're facing right now. And so on the screen, these are the barriers that we polled you on earlier. Take a look at those really quickly. I give you about 15 seconds to do that because maybe out of that barrier, there is a challenge that immediately comes to mind that you can name as your challenge statement. So grab that pen and paper, that pencil and paper that I mentioned at the top of the hour. It's quiz time, okay? So now that you've refreshed yourself with maybe your response to the barrier challenge, I want you to do this activity. So I'm going to do a real quick refresher. Here's what you're asked to do. Name one adoption barrier that you know exists. Now, if you don't have one based off of the poll, that's totally fine. Just come up with any example. Name one barrier that you know exists, and then write that as your challenge statement. The next thing I want you to do is walk through those 5 whys. Ask why 5 times, go deep, not wide, and keep asking until you reach your root cause. Don't stop at the symptoms. Remember, we don't want to address the symptom. We want to get under the hood and look at the root cause. And then when you hit something structural, that's where you stop. And again, you can have multiple root causes, but for this example, we just need one. After you do that, we're going to take some time to match your root cause to a core tenet. And then we'll have a little bit of conversation about how today you can leave with one response or one way to address that challenge. So on the screen, we're going to take 3 minutes. I'll go off camera, give you all time to do the activity. And when we come back, I would love to have at least one person in the chat name your challenge statement and the root cause that you came up with. And if we need extra credit, because many of us love an extra credit, I'll ask you even which core tenet mapped back to your root cause. So let's take the next 3 minutes, set our timer, and let's get to work. All right, welcome back. I hope that you are ready to drop a response in the chat. And I hope that y'all can hear that music because that was definitely Snoopy and I picked it out just for you. Okay. So, do I have one brave volunteer who would like to share maybe your challenge statement or share the root cause that you identified, or for those of us in the room who love extra credit, that would be me. 100 is good, but 105 is even better. Share which core tenant maps back to the root cause that you identified. And I will pull up the chat because I want to acknowledge anyone who is brave to drop their response in chat. Let's see. Put the cheat sheet back on screen. Y'all, I didn't even see that. I apologize. You see what happens when the chat is removed? Okay, do we need 15 more seconds? Even if you just got to the challenge statement, feel free to share that. Feel free to share that. Thank you so much for putting it back up. I appreciate you, Danielle. Anyone at all have any reactions, even if you didn't come up with a challenge statement, any reactions to the activity? Okay, we have a challenge statement in the chat. Teachers don't have enough time to learn how to use the tool effectively. And the root cause is that school administrators aren't fully bought in and haven't been onboarded properly. Now, that is a real life scenario. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Anyone else? Because I'm passing out gold stars today and I want you to have one. Anyone else want to drop their response in chat? Okay. Well, we certainly won't belabor the moment, but I want to make sure that I give um pause. Okay. We will move on. So here is what I want you to think about. Though I cannot see them, I just believe that on your notepad, you wrote one challenge statement down, or even you arrived at the root cause, or even maybe you identified a core tenant. Think about this out of what you arrived at. What is one action that your team could take based on that tenant? If you maybe selected student voice or context expertise or even reimagining, what is one action your team could take based on that tenant? You don't have to drop that in chat, just something that I want you to think about. Here are some responses that others have named: demonstrating trust in others first without expecting them to demonstrate it in you, defining a shared why across the team before beginning the work, and creating a collective definition of trust with the team. Another is defining the key decisions that will be made in the work, co-designing how shared decision making will take shape, piloting the process for shared decision making, and the last two, continually embodying the contributions of students first, and then valuing the contributions of students on par or higher than adults. So these are just some examples. There are so many pieces of action that you could take, but just wanted to share some that may help to inform what you do when you leave today. So let's get to your questions. I did not keep up with the chat, obviously, but I want to pull it up real quick to see if there are any questions. I know that we have our producers working to identify questions as well, so I want to make sure I acknowledge that. And I'm going through, are there any questions that I need to address? Any questions at all? Because I want to make sure we take the time for that. And let me say this as well. It could be related to, maybe some co-design that you're currently doing or ideas that you have related to wanting to implement a different way of co-design. So thank you so much. So I just want to leave that open-ended for you all. And it's okay if you don't have any questions, you know how to find us. So you can always reach out to us for more information or the opportunity to have office hours and ask questions. Thank you so much, Kellyanne. So here's what I'll do. In the event that, do you have any templates for surveys when beginning this work? Um, we do have a resource that I believe could support you. And Tia, if you could, actually, I have the registration. I will email you offline, Tia. Thank you so much for that question. I will email you offline. And let me make a note of that right now because I do not want to forget you. Thank you so much for raising that. Okay, I'm going to move on to, you're so welcome. I'm going to move on to our wrap up, but please, if there are any other questions, drop those as our phenomenal producer, Kellyanne, has mentioned. You can drop that in the QA feature or the chat. All right, so as we come to a close, I want to just share what it is that we were able to accomplish today. I think the first thing to name is just opening up the aperture of how we think about co-design. I believe that when you design with the communities and not for communities, that the level of tool that you create or configuration that you land on is so much richer because those who will be using it have been invited at the table. And so here it is. At the end of our time together today, we prioritize this idea of co-designing solutions and the need for districts to be able to trust that their time and their voice will be honored in the partnership. Early on, we talked about that fit, that is the gap. And when you take into consideration that districts have a challenge that your tool could solve, and you invite them as a part of that process as co-designers, that is where you see the transformation. So we talked about that gap. We talked about co-design being an ongoing partnership, right? It's an iterative process. It's not a one-time event. And how communities who are closest to the challenge, they hold that expertise that can help inform what it is that we build as a team. And then the root cause, simple activity. And one thing I believe in is keeping it simple. Simple activity, but provides such rich data around root causes, addressing those rather than symptoms. So I hope that today you found this information useful and you walked away with at least one nugget that you can apply today. I want to also share with you before we conclude, and let me pause because I think I saw a question. Okay, here's a question, and I'll read these. How do you recommend providers act on what they discover through the root cause analysis without overhauling their entire product? That is such a great question. And to be honest, it comes up often, right? Because the product team, they already have their roadmap, they have their milestones, they have really these points of reflection or feedback points where they may do a rapid cycle change. The one way that as a provider you can act on what you discover through that analysis without overhauling the process is one, bringing in those same stakeholders and reintroducing what your timeline looked like, and see if there are any barriers to adjusting the timeline with the district. And I'm raising that because some districts, they have their RFP proposals at different times because of their calendar or their district calendar schedule. They may have blackout dates or critical points where they heavily engage with partners, and then slower times where they do that. It could also be related to what it is that their board asks or requires of them. So I would say the first thing that you want to do is be transparent, because when you share with your district team, and we've seen this, when you share with your district team, we are doing this and naming why we're doing it, because we heard phenomenal feedback from you, because we want to leave space for making the change, then they are generally open to making a shift in the timeline. The second thing that I would say is that collaborative innovation, we actually use and advise teams to use and have used the decision making tracker. And this is a tool that product teams share with the district partner, and they're honest about if they're not able to make a certain change. Why is that? They share the feedback with the district team. And we have seen that when they are upfront about the yeses and the nos, and that we're putting this on pause, that it helps to really, really transform the relationship and continues to invest in that trust bucket. So that's one way that I would say. I hope that was helpful. It looks like we have another question. What do districts most commonly say they wish solution providers understood about how they operate? That sometimes who you think the point person is, and please forgive me if you hear this noise in the background, they are cutting this grass. I can barely hear myself. One thing is that sometimes the product team thinks that they have to go to the IT person for an IT tool. And it's not all the point person, or the primary point person is not always a one-to-one match, right? Sometimes it's the partnership coordinator that needs to be the first point of contact before you even get to that IT person, because imagine they're inundated with so much. And so what I would recommend is you reach out to if they have a partnership team, a partnership coordinator, to find out who the proper point of contact would be. And that is a lot of what we hear from districts say, hey, they sent this information, I never got it. And they never got it because they didn't get with the right point of contact. I think we're good. How can solution providers invite school and district leaders to co-design when they are still in planning stages of their product? So I always say this, the earlier, the better. The earlier, the better. And even in the planning stage, one of the things that we always recommend to product teams is using a student voice or practitioner voice to inform the challenge or the tool or the configuration that they are hoping to build. Because if you start, even if it's super ground level, start building, and then you invite a practitioner voice or student voice, and they say, hey, this isn't even a tool that we would use regularly, or did you consider X? And now you've gone so far down the line where it's hard to turn back. We always say the earlier the better. So we call that co-designing the research question. And that is really the primary point of what is it that we want to create? Why is it that we want to create it? And how does it map back to the contextual needs of the district? So I hope that is helpful. All right. Thank you so much for those questions. And let me Okay. So before we wrap today, I want to share with you all something very exciting. And this is our summer cohort experience. This is what is coming next. And so if you are an ed tech leader, a developer, a creator who's bridging solution design, looking for real district impact, long-term adoption, you want to be in our summer school. It is happening in the month of August. And one of our producers is going to drop the link. We have an interest form. And so if this was good to you, you don't want to miss summer school. It is going to be an amazing opportunity. And so we invite you to sign up to learn more about that opportunity. Now, as we talk about summer school, really high level, you might say, well, what is it? What are we going to do? We're going to start explore and co-create. We're going to talk about product feedback in the classroom and how to really be able to connect with students and practitioners to learn from them to inform your tools, your configurations, your product in the way that we do co-design. Going to talk about designing for the room, and then we're going to move into a co-creating. So this is really building what it is that districts actually need. So you don't want to miss that. Please click on the link and sign up, because we'll be sure as soon as applications open, we'll get that information out to you. We don't want you to miss it. All right. Well, we've come to the end of the road. And I want to invite you back June 24th for Loop It Back, using community feedback to drive better ed tech. Um, Feedback we know is critical, right? But when we talk about looping it back, that means that we are using it to inform what we're building, what we're creating, what we're designing, so that you don't want to miss. The QR code is on the screen. Feel free to grab that so that you can sign up, because it's going to be another amazing webinar. I want to check back really quickly to see if we had any other questions before I close. Okay, we good. Okay, thank you so much for dropping that interest form. All right, y'all. We have made it to the very, very end. I want to say thank you to all of you who joined us today. We thank you for registering. We thank you for your time and your attention in our session today. Please join us for a webinar too, where we talk about looping it back. You don't want to miss that, okay? And also, we encourage you to sign up, hit that link for the interest form for our summer school. It is going to be an amazing opportunity. And who doesn't like summer school? I know I loved it, okay? So thank you so much again. We appreciate you all, and we hope to see you June 24th. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.